Hi everyone. Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for this ASEAN series of webinar. On your screen, you will see some poll question, pre-event post question. So we will start the webinar shortly. In the meantime, we appreciate if you can give us some feedback for the participate in the poll event poll. And so on the holding slide, you will see ATIGA survey questionnaire. So it's a questionnaire by NTI, which seeks to get your views on the working ground on what is happening with ATIGA. So your views on what's actually happening on the ground will actually really help the government on what they can talk about, negotiate next for ATIGA. Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Monday afternoon. We will start the webinar shortly. In the meantime, you will see a short pre-event poll on the screen. We would appreciate your feedback on this pre-event poll. And also on the holding slide, you will see that MTI has launched a Q&A questionnaire to hear your views on the ASEAN Trade Agreement. So they are looking to understand your views on the RO procedures and also on the ASEAN-wide self-certification scheme. So your response will be very important for MTI to understand what happens on the ground and to enhance the trade agreements trade in goods agreement. So you can also scan the QR code to undertake the survey, or we will also share the link to the survey in the chat box. So without further ado, I will invite Mr. Jason Lee from SPF to give his opening remarks.
Thank you, Nicole, and a very good afternoon to our members, speakers, and friends. On behalf of the SBF Free Trade Agreement Education Outreach Team, welcome to the first part of our ASEAN webinar series. Now, the ASEAN region is still and always our largest and most important trading partner. Our National Business Survey showed that 84% of businesses with an overseas presence are engaged in ASEAN. This is similarly reflected in our FTA use, with ATIGA the most used FTA among Singapore businesses, and 74% of Singapore businesses using FTAs making use of any one of the ASEAN FTAs. We have therefore chosen to focus on ASEAN, and this is the start of our ASEAN webinar series this year. In the second and third part of this series, we will aim to cover services, e-commerce, and likely the ASEAN-China FTA. So ASEAN-China FTA. So please keep a lookout for information on those webinars, which will be coming out in the following weeks. We will also be running a couple of webinars on RCEP as well, which we know the business community is very excited about. Registration is already open for those, so please do sign up if you are interested. On the topic we are discussing today, trade facilitation, we think it apt to start a series off with addressing customs issues. Information and transparency on overseas customs regulations and issues faced with overseas customs authorities are perennially the biggest issues faced by our exporters. It is without doubt the biggest non-tariff barrier that we face, so one that we are keen to hear from government agencies on their bilateral efforts and initiatives, as well as what businesses can do themselves to mitigate some of these issues faced at the border. So today, we are happy to have colleagues from the Ministry of Trade and Industry, Singapore Customs, and Enterprise Singapore, one of the government agencies subject matter experts in their respective fields, to share with us what is in ATIGA for trade facilitation and STRACAP, the ASEAN Harmonized Tariff Nomenclature, and the ASEAN-wide Self-Certification Scheme. If at any point during the presentation you have a question, please feel free to ask them through the Q&A function below. Our speakers may address them during the course of their presentation. If not, there will be a Q&A segment at the end, and I will post these questions on your behalf, time permitting. Should you prefer to ask your questions directly instead, please feel free to indicate that you wish to do so by stating your name and company, and we will call on you to do so. Finally, if you have any queries after the webinar at any point in time, please feel free to write in to us. Our email is fta@sbf.org.sg. Our team of former FTA users in the private sector themselves and former government officers have been assisting businesses at different stages of their FTA journey, from considering and exploring different FTAs to issues encountered after using FTAs. We run this complimentary service for close to 2 years now, working closely with the various government agencies on a range of different issues. Last year, we answered 188 queries. So please do write in to us. We want to know the issues you're facing and partner you in your FTA journey. So without further ado, let me hand over the time to Keng Phang, Deputy Director for ASEAN at the Ministry of Trade and Industry. Keng Phang, please.
Hi, thank you, Jason. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keng Phang. I'm from MTI's ASEAN Division covering trade and goods issue. So I'll give you a broad overview of trade facilitation as well as the ASEAN Trade and Goods Agreement before letting Rajiv and Daniel go in depth into the various topics. Okay, next slide, please. So a brief introduction of the ASEAN Trade and Goods Agreement, or what we call the ATIGA for short. So it's signed in 2009 and entered in force in 2010. It is the cornerstone of ASEAN's economic integration journey, and it helps us establish an integrated and market and production base in the ASEAN region. The ATIGA is also undergoing an ongoing review right now so that the terms remain relevant for the business community. So if you have any feedback, please send them to us or to SBF, who direct them to us as well. Okay, next. Okay, the ATIGA cover 3 main areas: tariffs, that includes market access as well as rules of origin, custom procedures, non-tariff measures. So today we'll focus more on the custom procedures and NTNs. Okay, next. Okay, so first, let us start with custom procedures. So custom cooperation in ASEAN is important. It allows for predictability, consistency, and transparency in the application of customs law, as well as efficient custom procedures. So both of these will expedite goods clearance at the port, which means time and money saved for businesses like you. Okay, next. There are currently 3 ways which you can claim for preferential tariffs under the ATIGA. So the hard copy certificate of origin, or the ATIGA Form D, which I believe most of you should be familiar with, or the ATIGA E-Form D, which can be submitted through the ASEAN single window. So that's the electronic certificate of origin. The third one is the ASEAN-wide self-cert, which is actually the focus for today. Rajiv will share more in detail later. So in ASEAN, there are several committees that have been established to streamline custom procedures. So either MTI or the Singapore Customs, sometimes both MTI and Singapore Customs, who sit on these committees to represent Singapore. So once again, welcome your feedback so that we'll be able to represent business realities closely in these committees. Okay, next, on the non-tariff measures. So within ASEAN, virtually all tariffs have been eliminated under the ATIGA. However, this has come, the fall in tariffs is actually accompanied by a huge rise in non-tariff measures. So what are non-tariff measures? Okay, next slide. There are 2 main types of non-tariff measures here. First are the standards, technical regulations, and conformity assessment and procedures, or what we call the STRACAP in the ASEAN circuit, or you might hear technical barriers to trade. So that's the other name that is commonly known as. So STRACAP ensure quality, environment protection, as well as national security. So some examples to include labeling requirements or electronic standards. So the second group of NTMs will be sanitary and phytosanitary standards. So these are meant to protect human, animal, or plant life. So some examples would include the food safety standards. So NTMs have an impact on trade. So almost 90% of global trade actually are subjected to NTMs. They also increases the trade costs, sometimes even more than the tariffs itself. And they also tend to disproportionately affect SMEs. Also, NTMs are difficult to quantify and makes trade unpredictable. Okay, while NTMs serve legitimate purposes, excessive NTMs could hinder trade. So for example, non-tariff measures could become non-tariff barriers, or NTBs, when they are excessively strict and complex, or they favor domestic companies, or the standards are so difficult to comply with. NTMs could also become procedural obstacles when the processes required to comply with the NTMs are so difficult to achieve. Okay, so next, ATIGA makes an effort to address NTMs. So there are commitments to promote transparency of NTMs under the ATIGA. Generally, all NTMs are required to be notified 60 days before implementation. This is under Article 11 of the ATIGA. Also, all NTMs are in the process of being published on the ASEAN Trade Repository. So if you are interested to take a look, you can scan the QR code there. All ASEAN member states are in the process of uploading all NTMs onto the ASEAN Trade Repository. Also, similar to custom procedures, committees have also been set up to address NTMs. So MTI, as well as relevant agencies such as Enterprise Singapore or SFA, who represent Singapore on these committees. So we welcome your feedback so that we can represent business views accurately on these platforms. All right, that's my very short introduction. Let my colleagues from Customs and Enterprise Singapore share more in detail. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. All detail into the ASEAN-wide self-certification scheme, as well as some common issues faced under the ASEAN Harmonised Tariff Nomenclature. So without further ado, let me start the agenda for today. I hope everyone can see the slides. Yeah, so the agenda for today would be that we will do a quick overview of what AWSC is. Subsequently, we go into the benefits of AWSC, the requirements to utilize AWSC, that is the registration so as to be a certified exporter, how to use AWSC, that is the documentation requirements, the obligations as a certified exporter or CE, and lastly, the common issues faced under the ASEAN Harmonized Tariff Nomenclature. So the overview and benefits of AWSC. So the ASEAN-wide self-certification scheme is a unified self-certification scheme that is implemented under the ASEAN Trade and Goods Agreement, or what we commonly call ATIGA. So it's a one unified self-certification scheme across all ASEAN member states. So previously, Singapore was a party to the Self-Certification Pilot Project 1. Subsequently, these two pilot projects 1 and pilot project 2 came together to form the ASEAN-wide self-certification scheme. And this scheme was implemented on the 20th of September 2020, which is adopted by all ASEAN member states. So the benefits of AWSC. So what AWSC does is that it facilitates greater intra-ASEAN trade among all ASEAN member states. It's fast and easy, whereby there's no waiting time. Companies can self-certify their products at any point in time once they are approved to be a certified exporter. This then simplifies all export procedures. Lastly, it also lowers costs to businesses because basically you don't need to submit any cost statements to Singapore Customs. Once you have been approved to be a certified exporter, you can then self-certify your products. And you also do not need to obtain any certificate of origin. So how does AWSC works? So yourself, the exporter, would then apply to be a certified exporter with Singapore Customs. Once authorized, Singapore Customs will then approve the exporter to be a certified exporter, while at the same time registering the CE information in the centralized database. As soon as you're authorized to become a certified exporter, you can then out the origin declaration. You can then dispatch the origin declaration to an importer over in the ASEAN authorities in the ASEAN member states. The importing authorities will then check that the origin declaration information corresponds with whatever Singapore Customs has placed in the CE database. If everything tallies, the goods will be granted preferential tariff treatment. So what are the requirements to utilize AWSC? So basically, we have adopted a three-pronged approach. Firstly, the company needs to check their eligibility to be a certified exporter. You can then, once you're eligible, you can then submit the application form to be a CE, which also includes the product details that you wish to register with Singapore Customs. Once you are successful and you're authorized to be a certified exporter, you can then make out the origin declaration and fulfill the CE obligations. So I'll elaborate on this three-pronged approach more in the upcoming slides. So the requirement to utilize AWSC. So all exporters who wish to utilize AWSC will be required to submit an application to be registered as a certified exporter. So each exporter will be assessed on its eligibility and each application will be processed within 7 working days. So the eligibility that Singapore Customs places upon the companies is based upon Rule 12A of the operational certification procedure. So basically what the company needs to make sure to be eligible for to be a certified exporter is that it needs to be registered in the exporting member state, that is Singapore. It has to know and understand the rules of origin under ATIGA. It has good experience in export and import procedures. There's no record of rules of origin fraud. It is a good compliance record. And if you are a trader and not a manufacturer, you should have a manufacturer's declaration. And in the event that a retroactive check or verification check is conducted, be ready to provide all the necessary information. Lastly, the company needs to have a sound bookkeeping and record keeping system. So what do you need to provide to Singapore Customs in the application to be a certified exporter? You need to provide the item that you wish to export under AWSC. If you are not the manufacturer, you need to provide the manufacturer's declaration. You need to provide the HS code of the item at the 6-digit level. You need to provide to us the authorized signatories as well as the respective specimen signatures. I will elaborate more on this in the upcoming slides. Basically, whoever makes out the origin declaration has to be the one that signs on the origin declaration, and this will be uploaded in the CE database. So for companies exporting goods in a back-to-back arrangement, a first leg proof of origin, hard copy Form D, e-Form D or origin declaration is required, as well as the manufacturer's declaration from the manufacturer of the good. Upon successful registration, each certified exporter will be issued with an authorization letter. What will contain in this authorization letter is the validity of the CE registration, the good and HS sub-heading of the item registered to make out the origin declaration, the obligations as a certified exporter, and lastly, the terms and conditions to be a certified exporter. So once you, as I mentioned earlier, so once you have been successfully registered, Customs will input the CE information into the ASEAN-wide self-certification CE database. Importing authorities will then check against the information on the ASEAN-wide self-certification CE database with the information made out on the origin declaration so as to verify the legitimacy. So how to utilize AWSC? So you may proceed to make out an origin declaration on the commercial invoice, but let's say you do not have the commercial invoice at the time of exportation. It can then be made out of any of the following commercial documents, which is the billing statement, delivery order, or packing list. There is also a requirement to have a minimum data stated in the origin declaration. So what is required is that you will need to have the certified exporter detail, that is the CE authorization code. You'll need to have the description of the code, which is the product name, 6-digit HS code, the origin conferring criterion, the country of origin, the FOB price when RVC is used, the quantity of goods, the trademark if applicable, and in the event there is a back-to-back origin declaration, you'll need to have the original proof of origin reference number, the date of issuance, the country of origin of the first exporting country, and if applicable, the CE authorization code of the exporter from the first exporting country. Lastly, you will need to have a certification by the authorized signatory of the CE that the goods specified in the origin declaration do meet all the relevant requirements, then the signature has to be stated over the printed stamped name of the signatory. So if you notice, beside the FOB price, we have put an asterisk. So basically what that states is that under Rule 25 of the ATIGA OCP, you are only required to reflect the FOB price in the event that the RAC criteria is used and it is exported to the following countries, which is Indonesia, Cambodia, or Laos. For the other 7 countries, you do not need to state the FOB price if you are using the RAC criteria. Furthermore, for CEs that choose to nominate a third-party declaring agent or freight forwarder to be authorized signatory, this is allowed under AWSC. Just do note that in the event that a verification request is made, the responsibility will still lie on the certified exporter to provide all the relevant information. So this is a quick example of an origin declaration under AWSC. So this is something that we have come up with to assist everyone to use as a template. So basically what you can see here is that we have the name of the product, the HS code in the 6-digit level, the origin conferring criterion, the FOB value if it's required, the quantity of goods, and the trademark if applicable. Then it's followed by the declaration at the bottom and then the signature. This is a quick example that we have used. So you can see that we use a commercial invoice example to provide all the relevant information under AWSC. This is an example if you are choosing to export the goods under the back-to-back or back-to-back declaration. Basically, if you're using the back-to-back origin declaration, what you require additional is that you need the original proof of origin reference number, the country of origin from the first exporting party, and lastly, the date of issuance of the original proof of origin. If you do have the certified exporter authorization code of the first exporting country, that is, if this good is brought into Singapore under an OD or origin declaration, then you can state that as well. So under the ASEAN-wide self-certification, you are also allowed to export your products with a proof of origin under the back-to-back arrangement. So this then brings about 9 permutations of 3 different types of proof of origin under the ATIGA back-to-back arrangement. So basically, if you are importing the goods under an origin declaration, you can still export the products with a hard copy Form D, e-Form D, or an origin declaration as well. This applies the same for a hard copy Form D, that is if you're importing the products into Singapore with a hard copy Form D, as well as an e-Form D. So what happens after the OD is made out? So once the origin declaration is made out with the manually applied signatories, it should be then dispatched to your customer. So just to elaborate on this point, currently all invoices and signatures have to be manually applied. It cannot be electronically applied. So when you are dispatching your invoices, your commercial documents to your customers overseas, it has to be a manual issuance of the invoice as well as the signatures. So once the OD is presented to the importing authorities, the ASEAN member state will then apply for a claim of preferential tariff for the goods. So what are the obligations as a certified exporter? So you need to ensure continuous compliance to the ATIGA rules of origin and operational certification procedures. You need to ensure registration condition is satisfied in the authorization letter. You have to maintain up-to-date records of origin declarations made out. You need to furnish the required information at the request of customs during a post-exportation check if there is one. And if there is any changes to your registration, you have to update Singapore Customs as soon as possible so that we can make these changes on the database. And lastly, you need to be ready to cooperate in the event of a verification request. So this is just some admin ground rules that we want to highlight to the exporter. So if during the point of applying for an export permit declaration for the shipment, if you do know that your importer intends to claim preferential tariff treatment under AWSC, please do take the PRI indicator on your end. If you don't know where this indicator is, you can always check with your TradeNet front-end solution vendor to locate this field. They should know where this indicator is. Basically, this is where the indicator is. If you can see, it's just below the invoice date. It's stated as preference duty indicator. So some important things to note. If you do fail to fulfill or comply with your CE obligations, your CE status may result in a termination or revocation. I also want to just touch base a bit on the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. As everyone is aware, it may be entering into force on 1st Jan 2020. And RCEP also has an approved exporter that will be modeled under AWSC, which allows exporters to self-certify their products. So this AWSC will be some sort of a precursor to the RCEP model. So if you do join AWSC, you'll be beneficial in understanding how you can be an approved exporter under RCEP. Currently, Customs is still finalizing the declaration origin format. And once this has been finalized, you will share with the traders in the upcoming sessions. So there is some information on AWSC that you can find on your own. So Singapore Customs has a web page on AWSC. ASEAN also has a web page on AWSC. You can access both web pages through the link shown. If you do have any clarification or you have any inquiries, you can always email them to us at customs_ro@customs.gov.sg. Let me go on to the ASEAN Harmonized Tariff Nomenclature. So some common issues that have been raised by companies when exporting their products. The exporting authorities, basically these common issues are that the XHS code that should fall under. Therefore, the companies have difficulty in identifying the HS code of the product. So what you can do in such an event is that you can obtain a customs ruling letter from the importing authorities and present it to Singapore Customs so as to reclassify the goods. If it's a back-to-back shipment, you can obtain a customs ruling letter from the final importing authorities and present it to the originating CO issuing authorities to reach. It is based on the first leg proof of origin. So whatever is stated in the first leg proof of origin is what will be indicated in the back-to-back CO. While operating the customs ruling letter, it has to be presented to the first leg proof of origin issuing authority. It cannot be presented to Singapore so as to be reflected in the back-to-back certificate of origin. So if you wish to amend the previously approved HS code by Singapore Customs so as to reflect that of the importing authority's interpretation, what you need to submit is that you need to submit the customs ruling letter to Singapore Customs, as well as some sort of supporting documents such as the 100% compliant. Then route this information to our classification colleagues over at our site to have the HS code reclassified, and it cannot be reverted. Neither can the same product have two different HS codes. So we also do have some resources on the ASEAN Harmonized Tariff Nomenclature. So if you're unable to obtain a HS code for the good, you may visit the following website shown below, which offers detailed guidelines on how you can determine the HS code of your products or your goods. We also have courses that are currently conducted by local polytechnics, but I think currently due to the current COVID-19 situation, this class itself, what we do have is a self-learning resource or handy guide, which would be able to assist the company in all your HS classification queries. So with that, I'll come to the end of my presentation. If you do have any questions, please put them out in the Q&A session, and I'll try my best to address them as best as I can. Thank you. I will now hand over the floor to Daniel.
Hi, good afternoon. Can I just check if everyone can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Hi, good afternoon. Thanks to previous presenters from SPF, MTI, and Customs. I'm Daniel Wong from Enterprise Singapore. We're part of the Policy and Promotion Division. So I'll take the next 20 minutes or so to share on this subject matter on technical barriers to trade. We'll be covering some of these topics. Firstly, to give everyone an overview of quality and standards, to give everyone a background on what technical barriers to trade are. Next, I will bring on some examples to highlight how technical barriers to trade, or TBTs in short, can potentially impact businesses, can potentially impact trade. Next, we'll look at some of the mechanisms that we have, namely the ATIGA STRACAP chapter, in helping us to manage TBTs, as well as some of the regional mechanisms like the ASEAN Consultative Committee for Standards and Quality, ACCSQ, to better manage technical barriers to trade in this region. And last but not least, beyond this seminar session, how can we work together? So let's dive right into it on the background of quality and standards as well as the technical barriers to trade. So when viewed from the trade's perspective, the standards and conformance will be known as technical barriers to trade, and essentially there are three categories of what constitute a TBT. Firstly, standards. Secondly, conformity assessment procedure, and lastly, technical regulations. So the next couple of slides will be a background on what each of these are. So these are policies. These are different mechanisms that are utilized by governments, utilized by the different economies to fulfill an intended policy objective, such as protecting human health, protecting public safety. We need to note here that TBTs only applies to products, to goods, but not to services. For standards, right, the first part of this TBT portion, they are basically requirements, industry best practices on various product specifications, on management processes and guidelines. So I think we are quite familiar with what standards are. We've come across some of these standards, in our company operations at times. I have some examples here, more interesting examples. For the paper sizes, the A series paper sizes, your A4, A5, A3, these are actually defined by the ISO 216 standards. The laptop, the adapter that's feeding the power into your laptops right now to view this seminar, whether you're at home or in your office, have to comply with certain IEC technical specification, specifically the 62700 for the DC power supply. So essentially, standards are these consensus-based documents, that provide a set of rules, requirements, and specifications to guide a product, to guide its process, or to guide a service, to make sure that all these are fit for their purpose. And in broadly speaking, there are two types of standards. The international ones, they are developed by international organizations like the ISO, like the IEC, and also respective national standards that each country or each nation develops. Now, I have some examples of, so standards are mostly voluntary, and they can bring about many benefits to consumers, to businesses, and ultimately to our economy. Under certain circumstances, compliance with standards can be obligatory or mandatory in a sense. So I have two examples here. From the food sector, there is the GFSI standard, such as your FSC 22000, your BRCS. Now, the main aim of this standard is really to reduce food safety risks, balance, and convergence between the various numerous different kinds of food safety management systems out there in the market. And from our understanding, all these EU retailers you see here in this example on the left side, Costco, Carrefour, or even Amazon, they will work with GFSI recognized certification programs in their supply chain. So in other words, if you are a Singapore food supplier who wants to work with all these people there, your company will have to obtain the necessary GFSI standards. And from this perspective, this becomes a sort of a mandatory standards. And by adopting the right standards, in this sense, it will help to facilitate market access benefits for our Singapore companies and our Singapore exports. Now, over on the right side of the slide here, I have the example of how standards are also being referenced to meet regulatory requirements. And this will be in the marine and offshore sector. The Singapore standard SS600 Code of Practice for Bunkering is actually a requirement by the Maritime Port Authority of Singapore for your bunker suppliers, bunker craft to meet and satisfy if all these players want to provide a service within the Port of Singapore. So this actually helps to uplift the overall efficiency, overall transparency amongst the different bunkering players here in Singapore. Now, the second part of TBT, rather the second category of this is conformity assessment procedure. And allow me to take this slide to explain some of these important concepts regards to conformity assessment procedure. So the first part of it is the whole idea of conformance, right? Conformance is actually a process in which conformity assessment bodies, these are third-party companies that a company can go to make sure that their product or their services or their organization meets a certain requirement. So for example, a manufacturer of a copper sheet will need to get its product tested, right? And to get a test report done in a lab to show its customer for example, the chemical composition of the product is indeed what it claims to be, is indeed what is prescribed in the contractual obligation between them and their customers. So the next question comes, who are these conformity assessment bodies? These are enterprises, they are third-party enterprises, they are specialized in the activities of testing, inspection, and certification, and is on the right side of the slide here. These three broad categories of services they are provided, and they can conduct this on a third-party basis for products, for services, for management processes, or for enterprises. So most of these companies are in the private sector. They also can be found in several government agencies who does this around in this region. Now, the more important question comes, right? When we go to third-party testing or certification bodies, how do we know that these people do what they're supposed to do correctly? How do we know that these people are doing what they are doing impartially? So the next concept, last concept here on this slide is accreditation, or lower right-hand corner of the slide here. And this is actually a process in which there is an independent evaluation of all these different third-party bodies against a recognized standards out there in the international world to carry out a specific set of activities, be it the test, the calibration, the inspection, or the certification. And the accreditation is often done by the National Accreditation Body, and in Singapore's case, it's done by the Singapore Accreditation Council. So I'll give you an example to help everyone relate better on this concept of accreditation. For example, the milk that we drink, right? To know the milk fat content, they have to be determined by a chemical or biological test done in a food lab, for example. Now, the only way we can know that these labs are doing it correctly and they are not some fly-by-night sort of enterprise or an operation is to make sure that these are accredited labs, because accreditation will be checking all these checkers to make sure that they are doing it correctly, they're doing it impartially, they're doing it with the necessary level of competence. Okay, so that's for conformity assessment procedures. And lastly, technical regulations. These are actually measures that on product characteristics, on production methods, be it via standards or conformity assessment procedures. And as the name itself suggests, it's the regulation. So compliance with this is actually mandatory. So we have seen some standards which are referenced in regulations or regulatory requirements per se, that makes it mandatory. For example, the ISO 13485 medical device quality management standard. So this is a QMS that's required by regulators in Singapore, in Brazil, in many different regulators around the world, for medical device manufacturers, for manufacturers of critical components of the medical device to be compliant to. So in this case, we see this particular standard 13485 will actually become a part of a technical regulation. Now, closer back home, in order for some of our suppliers of controlled goods, right, to controlled household, electrical products to obtain the safety mark in order to sell these products to our consumers here in Singapore, the Singapore regulator, the safety authority, will actually require all these products to be tested to a certain set of IEC standards using SAC accredited testing laboratories. So in essence, we have gone through the three categories of technical barriers to trade. We have a rough idea of what technical barriers to trade are: standards, conformity assessment procedures, and technical regulations. So the next part of my presentation will move into how can technical barriers to trade, or TBTs, potentially impact businesses and potentially impact trade. So as mentioned by the earlier speaker, there are actually 12 different types of non-tariff measures in the market, in the global market. And what we are concerned here today at this session is actually on the lower right-hand corner, which is on technical barriers to trade. So these are, as the name itself suggests, non-tariff measures. So these are measures and policies that goes beyond duties, they go beyond taxes, but they bring about a similar effect on the import and export of goods into an economy. So I have some examples of TBTs, and we can relate to how it can potentially impact your business. So for example, in the food sector, in Thailand, they actually had a draft measure on the labeling of alcohol in 2014, where they actually wanted to prohibit the use of celebrities and cartoons on various alcohol beverages. Okay, so this measure eventually came into effect, and compliance with this is mandatory. In 2018, the Indian Food Authority submitted a draft requirement to change. They wanted to change the logo of the vegetarian food, prepackaged food in India, right, from the current green dot to green triangle. Okay, so eventually this did not come into effect, but you can understand and go through, put yourself in our shoes of a food manufacturer or food importer into all these markets. If all these technical barriers to trade does come into force, it actually will impact the entire line of manufacturing, your supply, the different kind of printing partners that you find. In 2018, Chinese Taipei, they introduced a new regulation governing the food allergen labeling on packaged food, right? They expanded the labeling list from the existing 5 allergens to 11. This eventually came to effect, and compliance with this is actually mandatory. So again, putting ourselves in the shoes of a manufacturer or an importer, all these have very real impact on operations. They have very real impact on the manufacturing processes of these companies. Next, we look at over in the medical device or medical technology field, TPTs can also be found in the form of technical regulations, in the form of different standards and conformity assessment procedures that's required on the different companies and the different medical device products. In 2018, the EU announced the medical device regulations. So this brought about very sweeping changes to the medical device landscape in Europe. Namely, companies which are already selling in the EU, right, with their existing products, with the existing CE mark products, will have to recertify their devices. So if you imagine, say, for example, you are a Singapore company doing diagnostic test kits for swab tests, right, for COVID swab tests. You are already selling to a hospital in Germany, you have clients and all that in the UK. With this in the effect, you have to find a new testing body. You have to find a new, what the EU know, they call their testing bodies as notified bodies. You have to find a new notified body to go through the entire testing and certification to get your products, your test kits re-CE marked again. So this came into effect, and the compliance with this is actually mandatory. The other example here will be in the form of product standards, right? Taiwan actually had the requirement for all surgical gloves, for all patient examination gloves, to have all these gloves tested with a tensile strength to ISO 11193. And the effects of this actually came, into effect. Compliance with this is necessary and it's mandatory. So again, imagine yourselves being, say, for example, Top Glove, right? You export and you manufacture so many gloves for the whole world. Now, with this new regulation in place, you have to retest your product to this new standard in order for you to gain market access into the Taiwanese market. I hope that gives everyone a flavor of how TBTs can impact trade and how TBTs can impact businesses. So we now know TBTs are an important factor in trade, in commerce. We do have some important mechanisms at a global level to influence and to control how the different governments make use of TBT in managing their import and export. And herein, we will look at the TBT or the STRACAP chapter in ATIGA. So to give everyone a quick understanding of how the TBT chapter in our FTAs work, I'll illustrate this with 2 blocks. So the first block you can see here is a lighter one in lighter gray. This is actually a foundation, and this is sort of like a base. So all economies, if you are part of WTO, you have to be compliant to the WTO TBT agreement. And so this is a commitment by all WTO members to adhere to a set of principles when they enact TBT in their respective economies. So these are very basic principles that, for example, country must be transparent. When they enact TBT, must be transparent in sharing this information. The TBT itself cannot be discriminative. It cannot form obstacles to trade, for example. But these are very basic form of principles. Now, when we go out there to negotiate with our trading partners, thereupon we build upon all these basic principles into a TBT plus provision. And this is the darker gray block that we see here. So these are captured in the specific TBT chapters in our FTAs. They go beyond just the basic principles at the WTO level to include things like additional rules and requirements. So the other example I talk about, say, for example, transparency. The WTO TBT agreement talks about everyone must be transparent, right? But transparency can be defined differently by different countries. Transparency to me can be, if I would ask you for information, you got to reply me within 60 days. But to another country, they can just give us in a summary. They don't provide us with a full detail. So the FTA will go about building upon all these basic principles to have additional rules, additional obligations to guide how all these trading partners should come about when they do TBTs. So I'll take the next few slides to highlight some of the TBT plus provisions that we have in our ATIGA, the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement. So herein we have Article 74.5 on standards. So I think we can take some time to read the quote here. All our FTAs are actually available online. If you have time, you can just go and Google them. type in ATIGA, type in TPT chapter, you can get familiarized with all the different provisions that we have there. So for this particular one, I just want to highlight here to give everyone a feel of how this TPT chapter works. Right? It actually talks about how ASEAN members or the different ASEAN member states, it's a shall level obligation. So they shall ensure that there is an easy comparison of the content, there's an easy comparison of the structure of their national standards with the international standards. So as a baseline, every one of us should we are all encouraged, all the countries are encouraged to utilize international standards. But when we don't, say for reasons of I have to develop a national standards with reference from an international standard because my climatic conditions in the country just do not permit, the use of the international standards. This provision will obligate the different countries in ASEAN to provide an easy comparison of the content and the structure, and also explain the reasons why there is a need to deviate from international standards, explain the reasons why there's a need to modify. Now, this is a provision that provides us with better clarity in the sense of how and why the local standards or the national standards are required, better explanation on the differences between the national and the international standards. And in essence, when we have all this clarity, it helps to promote better understanding and to help our companies, to help our exporters, to help even policymakers to better understand and how to comply with all these different national standards by the said country. Okay. Now, the other TPT Plus provision here that we have is from Article 75.6 on technical regulations. The code itself says that we need at least 6 months, right? ASEAN members should allow at least 6 months between the publication of their regulations and their entry into force. So all the different Southeast Asian members here, we all have made a commitment to say that before we have the regulation come into force, we will provide at least a minimum 6 months lead time. Okay, and this is very powerful because it is very, very effective and beneficial for companies, again, for policymakers, because it provides this lead time for us to raise queries, for us to seek clarifications, and more importantly, on how to comply with all these different regulations, how to comply with the regulatory requirements. So for our companies, it allows them the necessary time to make the necessary changes and to comply with all these technical regulations. From Article 76.3, this is on conformity assessment procedures. Basically, this provision talks about, this TPT Plus provision talks about how ASEAN members shall develop and implement various mutual recognition agreements. So I'll go into this in a slight detail in the later slide on what MRAs are, mutual recognition arrangements, in the various regulated areas in conformance with this framework. So this actually provides a foundation for regulatory cooperation, for closer information exchange between our regulators in specific industries, such as your medicinal products, your electrical equipment, your prepared foodstuff. And with closer and more aligned, or rather harmonized regulatory requirements on various products, we are inching forward to more freer trade in this region, actually. Okay, so now we look at some of the regional mechanisms that have been developed and implemented as a result of cooperation from some of the TPT provisions, TPT Plus provisions in the Free Trade Agreement. So this, in particular, the ASEAN Committee is formed to look at specific TPT issues across the various industries. This committee is called the ASEAN Consultative Committee for Standards and Quality. I know it's very long, it's a mouthful. In short, it's just ACSQ. And its main aim is to drive cooperation across the 10 ASEAN member states, right? To look at the different cooperation activities to remove technical barriers to trade and to facilitate the trade in goods for enterprises within ASEAN. So some of the sectors of interest, I've included them in this chart here. You have rubber-based, you have pharmaceutical, you have prepared food, medical device, etc. And the cooperation activities can range from framework agreements, can range from harmonized regulatory regimes under what is known as mutual recognition arrangements or agreements, MRAs. So to give everyone an understanding, a deeper understanding of how MRAs work, MRAs basically provides the mechanism or the the platform in place in the region here to reduce the need for duplicative inspection, to reduce the need for duplicative testing and certification in the specific sector that it's supposed to be in. So this will actually lower the cost of our market entry. This will actually facilitate faster market entry for our products into the Southeast Asian markets when we trade with our partners here. So some of the areas that ACCSQ has in terms of the MRAs will cover GMP, bioequivalence for generic medicinal products. It will cover inspection and certification systems for the different food hygiene. Now, to illustrate this MRA better, I have an example of the ASEAN Electronics Electrical Product MRA here. So this is actually actual MRA that's in place. So imagine ourselves as a exporter of a controlled electrical equipment from Singapore. So we'll start on the left-hand side here of the graph or the infographic here. We bring our product to a designated conformity assessment body in Singapore. So this can be a test lab. This can be a certification body that's designated. We get it tested, we get it inspected, we get the report, we get the cert, right? We put it together with the shipment. We head over to, for example, we have customers in Thailand who wants this, who wants our electrical products. Now, when we go over there, the Thai regulators would actually accept the test reports and to provide the approval on our products based on the accredited test certifications and the reports issued from Singapore. With this, I need not go and find I actually have saved a lot of hassle to find a local testing lab, to go out and find a local certification body, to send my samples up to get a testing, to do the rectification if there's any issues, shipping it here, back and forth. I'm able to skip that step to fulfill some of the sales orders and to deliver to my customers faster in Thailand. So essentially, MRAs itself encapsulates this purpose, is to reduce or to remove the need for duplicative testing and certification on products. All right, I've come to the nearing the end of my presentation. So I think we have three important key takeaways for us from this slide, from this presentation. Number one, standards and conformance or technical barriers to trade have key impacts on businesses and trade. Number two, the TBT plus provisions in our FTA such as ATIGA can help us better manage and navigate TBTs. Now, the last part, I think, is the more important, more exciting part, which is for us to work together with the companies here, with the government or officers, as well as the policymakers, to work together to highlight export issues or queries that are pertaining to technical barriers to trade. And how we can do so? Firstly, by better understanding and be acquainted with TBT and how S&C can help overcome such barriers. We can sign up for the e-ping notification via WTO. So the e-ping is actually a platform administered by the World Trade Organization. This is a public platform. You can go and Google it. Just type WTO TBT e-ping. All countries will have to notify their TBT before they actually enforce it in their markets. So you can sort it by the product that you want, sort it by the country. This will provide us with first-hand information of the new TBTs that are coming, with amendments to existing TBTs that are in these countries. Lastly, I think it's important for us to work together to share potential TBT issues which you may face when you go in market, which your goods, your products may face when they are exported out from Singapore. All right, let us know the description of the export issue. Give us the information regarding the port of entry, the agency or the ministry that's implementing the stated measure. Say, for example, if they don't recognize some of the test certificates that's being issued in Singapore, let us know which are the agencies that's doing this, etc. Let us know the relevant HS code, what is the product type, and whether, say, for example, I face this issue in X country, but my exports to another Y country doesn't have this problem. So let us know whether this product, this export issue is faced in other sectors as well. So I've included an email here, ppt_inquiry@enterprisesg.gov.sg. We have people manning this on a weekly basis, daily basis. Write to us if you have any of these queries. And I end my presentation here. Thank you very much.
I think thank you very much, Daniel, and our other speakers, Keng Phang and Rajiv as well. I think we received a couple of questions and we have a bit more time. But before we proceed with the Q&A, perhaps we could have everyone's feedback on today's session while we are working on the questions. Right. So while our participants are taking their time to answer these 3 short questions, maybe I'd like to pose my first question to Keng Phang. Keng Phang, in your presentation, you mentioned that ASEAN is working on a platform or website that lists all the NTMs. Will that include all the TBT related regulations like import requirements, certifications, and product registration requirements?
Thank you, Jason, for your question. The platform is called the ASEAN Trade Repository. So I think the website is atr.asean.org. So you can just quickly go and have a look. Yes, to your answer, it will include all the TBT measures, SPS measure, import licensing measures, and so on and so forth. But of course, it's being done in stages. I understand now that all the SPS measures are up already. So TBT, we are in the process of uploading, and it should be done by the end of the year, that all ASEAN member states will have uploaded that. And then the rest of the categories of NTMs will follow. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Keng Phang. So my next question from the audience is for Rajiv. Rajiv, you mentioned about getting customs ruling for the importing customs for the HS code in the event that it may not be the same as exporting customs or Singapore customs classification. Do you have any advice on how businesses can go about doing that? You know, what information should they submit? Get the full kind of input list, product brochure, and you know what else should they try to obtain from the importing customs authority? And in doing so, how can they make use of advanced ruling provisions in the FTAs? And finally, what do our businesses how do they go about if the importing customs don't kind of provide them the ruling that they require? Is there a feedback channel like what Daniel has highlighted for ESG's PPD email address? How can they work with Singapore Customs to resolve some of these issues?
Hi, thank you, Jason, for the question. I can't really turn on my video because I'm having quite a bad internet connection on my end.
No worries.
I do know the question on the HS customs ruling letter from the importing authorities to state their interpretation of what the HS code is. We do it might be in terms of liaising with the importing authorities or the customers themselves in the importing country. So what we can do is that what Singapore Customs has is a classification department which can then advise the company on whether they are able to reclassify that the importing authorities or the importing customer wants it to be. If let's say they do happen to office, what Singapore Customs has or can do is that we allow the company to state 2 different HS codes, because the HS code classification text in the CO is a free text field. But having said that, this is such a CO. But Singapore Customs allows the company to do that. But in the event that this is for them to have their HS code reclassified, so to do that, they will need to provide their own company's 100% classification code. I hope that was helpful in
Right. Thanks a lot, Rajiv. That was quite a comprehensive answer. I think although your network may be a bit patchy, so if our participants have any questions, please feel free to email to us, and perhaps we could answer some of these questions in maybe more detail, working with Rajiv to address that. I think maybe we give another, if our participants have any kind of final questions before we end today's webinar. If if you do want to kind of post your questions directly to our speakers, please feel free to indicate that as well. Okay, if not, maybe Rajiv, if your network permits, maybe I have one final question, and you can
Sure.
kind of answer that a bit slowly, taking into consideration the network. So you mentioned that the origin declaration, if that cannot be made on the commercial invoice during export, it may be made out on any of the following commercial documents, such as billing statement, delivery order, and packing list. So the question is, when the commercial invoice becomes available and ready, do businesses need to re-declare on that? And what happens if the origin declaration that is dispatched to the customer is lost in transit?
Hi, Jason. So if the commercial document or the commercial invoice at the point of exporting the good is not available, the companies can then make delivery note or packing list. If they have made the origin declaration on any of the commercial documents, origin declaration on the commercial invoice, they can still keep the other commercial documents declaration so they do not need to redo the commercial, the origin declaration on the commercial invoice. If let's say the information is lost in transit or the invoice is lost in transit, they can then redo the origin declaration and resubmit the. That being said, it has to be done within 12 months from the date of shipment. So this is a normal proven up to 12 months from the date of shipment. I wasn't patchy during then. Was that clear? So.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Rajiv. I did record glimpses of that, and but maybe we could kind of elaborate that over email, since I think there was certain parts you may have broken up a bit on. I think that's all the questions we have received today. Of course, we welcome any further questions from participants. If you have any question that crop up to you over the next couple of days or so, please feel free to write into us, and we're happy to work with our presenters to get back to you on your queries. If not, I'd like to thank our speakers, Keng Phang, Rajiv, and Daniel very much for your time, sharing your insights and expertise with our participants. And thank you everyone for tuning in today. And please stay tuned for information on our next series. Thank you all, and have a very nice day.